the other direction round. When Abraham is called the friend of God, what the text is saying is not that God, or not that Abraham found intimacy with God, but what it is affirming is that God found intimacy with Abraham. You see the distinction? Who are the people in your life that you want to be your friend? Well, if you think back to your days in grade school or high school or maybe even college, there was always that person. I call them the people that are from the deep end of the gene pool. Just a little bit better looking, a little bit stronger, a little bit faster, a little bit smarter. Hate them every one. But that individual, does that individual have a hard time making friends? Not normally. People want to be in the presence of that person. Now, that other person, maybe it was you in school, who's a little bit awkward, a little bit backwards, a little bit shy, a little bit uncertain, a little bit insecure. Does that person have difficulty making friends? Yeah. Yeah, typically. What I want to try and convince you of this weekend, if you're not already convinced of, is that the God of heaven, maker of all things, upholder of the world, the God of heaven who made the great wonders that we see in this universe around us, that being looks at you and says, I want to be in the presence of that person. That's what we're going to try to convince you of this weekend. But to get started, let me ask you this. I've got three questions to get started. How does your relationship to God make you feel? There's several ways you can answer that question. Does it make you feel secure, or does it make you feel fearful? You know the difference in those two things, right? You think about your relationship with your spouse, if it's a good one, just knowing that they are there calms you. But you think about a relationship with maybe some kind of evil or unjust manager or boss at work or something of that nature. Every time that person comes into your room, comes by the cubicle, by the office, how do you feel? I don't know what's about to happen. When you think of God, how does it make you feel? When you're by yourself, when you're all alone, do you ever have thoughts that perhaps I'm not as secure in that relationship as I ought to be? Does your relationship to God make you feel limited or limitless? If I take another step, if I go one more step, if I do one more thing, if I have one more thought, I'll get outside of the limits and the confines of his tolerance, of his patience of me. Ever known anybody like that? Have you ever been that person? Every time you have to make a choice in life, does it make you think, I wonder if God will be pleased with me? Or does it make you feel limitless? I have the power of the Almighty God behind me. Which way do you go? Does it make you feel worthy or unworthy? Ever known any people of faith who felt unworthy? How do you feel when you think about your relationship to God? Do you feel trusted? God believes in me. God trusts me. Or do you think he suspects you? Just waiting for you to fail. Two different ways you can view that. My contention is that the bond that you sustain with God has a very specific intent, and that intent is to lift you up. That bond is to make you stronger and better. His presence is to make you stronger, it's to make you better, it's to make you happier, it's to make you more successful in your spirituality and in your faith. That's what it's for. The bond that you sustain with God is not one that is designed to fill you with thoughts of doubt or thoughts of shame or guilt or anything, unless you're in the middle of sin. That might be a different topic. We're not talking about that this weekend. But it's not intended to do that. What it is intended to do is to change you, to lift you up, and to make you more than you could be without Him. If you feel in your daily life with God, if what you feel is guilt, shame, doubt, fear, uncertainty, if that's what you feel, I want to convince you this weekend that you don't understand something about the God that you're serving. You're missing something. So I can bring it to a point. Have you ever asked yourself that question? What is God's plan for me? That is a great way to do that, man. That is awesome. Yes, this is God. No. What's God's? Have you ever? Sure, you have. People ask that question all the time. We can ask it one of two ways. You can ask it out of hope. God's got a plan for me, and it's got goodness at the end of it. God's got a plan for me, and I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I should start. I don't know if I should try. I don't know if I can understand it. You can either start from a position of hope, or you can start from a position of fear. This weekend is about perception, not reality. What we're talking about this weekend is spiritual growth. Okay? We're going to be talking about in the rest of the lesson this evening some different ways that you can view your relationship to God. And they're all taken from the text. They're all biblical statements of what our relationship is with God. And I suspect that as we go through these different images, again, if you get to answer that question privately within your own mind where nobody else can pass judgment on you for what you're saying or what you're thinking, my guess is you're going to find one of those images, those images that resonates with you and your faith more than others. That is how you perceive where you are most comfortable in conceiving of your relationship to God. The truth of the matter, though, is as we go through these things, from the moment you become a child of God, you're all of them. That's why the text uses all the different images. As soon as you put Jesus Christ on in baptism, you become all of the things we're going to be talking about here in just a few minutes. But it doesn't really matter. Because you can only conceive of yourself with one of them. The fact that you might be something else, that you are something else, does it really help you? No. We're going to be talking about perception. This is not about God. This is not even really necessarily about the underlying truths of the text. This is about each one of us. This is about you. In your own quiet meditations of your heart, your mind, your soul, this weekend is about what you believe about you. And God may have done everything for you. God may be welcoming you into an intimacy that you could never imagine, and that's just the point. If you can't imagine it, if you don't think you're worthy of it, you'll never have it. It's about your perception, not the reality of things. The reality, of course, is the blessings of God not any benefit until you believe it is to your benefit. So, here's our premise. Faith fulfilled ends in friendship. Okay? We're going to come back to that thought over and over and again through the next 5 lessons. Faith fulfilled ends in friendship. Does an infant have a friend? No. You know why? Has no faith. Doesn't have the moral capacity to understand the concept of faith. Maybe you could argue he's got trust in the mother or something of that nature, where that bond is there, but by a matter of choice, a matter of intellect, no. He can't have it. Or she can't have it. It takes time, doesn't it? For that personality, for that mental capacity, for that moral judgment that is necessary. It takes time in the heart, mind, soul of that child for it to develop. You ever experience the same thing? And those of you who've been married for decades, you experience that same thing in your marriage? Did you really trust each other when you first got married? No, of course you don't. That's why you fight. You fight over everything because you're negotiating. You're trying to lay down the groundwork. And at some point you get to realize this is tiring. You know, we've already had fight number 22 about 17 times. Let's stop it. And when that happens, you get at peace with each other. What you have just done is you've tested each other's faith. You have found each other to be loyal. Faith, when it is fulfilled, ends in friendship. That's where God is trying to get you to go, to fulfill the growth and the maturation of your faith so that you can stand before Him as someone that can accept His friendship. Friendship is trust at its very nature, at its very core. That's what it is. It is a mutual respect, trust that is reciprocated with every positive interaction. That's what we just described. Let's put this material together. I came across this quote that was attributed to Aristotle. I assume it's right. Friendship is a single soul dwelling in two bodies. You think about the best friends you have in this world, isn't that true? There is something about that person, a harmony of thought, a harmony of intention, a harmony of uprightness. There's some harmony between the two individuals that binds them together in a way that nothing else can. It is a single soul in two bodies. Friendship with God ought to be the same thing. So what is your relationship to God like? I am God's fill in the blank. First thing that comes to your mind, don't say it out loud. This is for you personally. First thing that comes into your mind, don't say friend because that's cheating. You're looking ahead in the notes. I've got some ideas. I am God's servant. The Bible uses that all the time. Paul uses it seemingly in every letter. I am God's servant. Not a word we'd probably use, but I am God's steward. Found in the New Testament as well. Not because I'm trying to be sexist, but because I'm trying to be alliterative. I am God's son. You probably didn't think of the word steward. It's not a word we use. It's not a part of our culture very often. My guess is, if we weren't in this context of talking about friendship, and I came up and I asked you that question, most of you would either said servant or son. Those are the ways we talk about it. And then, of course, I am God's friend. Let's start looking at the first one. I am God's servant. The Bible's pretty clear. When it comes to spiritual matters, every person alive is a servant of something, correct? Romans chapter 6 says it directly. Do you not know that if you present yourselves to anyone as obedient slaves, you are slaves of the one whom you obey? And then it gives you two choices. These are the only two choices you have. In talking about these spiritual matters, faith matters, moral matters, ethical matters, you have two choices. You can present yourself as a slave of sin, which leads to death, or you can present yourself as a slave of righteousness, which leads to eternal life, or obedience rather, which leads to to righteousness rather. Everybody is a slave, servant of something. You have one thing here. You have the power of choice. You get to choose. Every individual who has ever been born has gotten to choose. Will I serve righteousness or will I serve sin? Now, choosing righteousness is the harder choice. Straight is that gate. Few enter in thereat. It's narrow, it's restrictive, it's harder to find it. It's harder to stay on it. So if it's harder, why choose it? Why choose the path that's harder as a servant? What motivates a servant? What motivates a slave? Punishment. The only reason a slave serves a master is because if he or she doesn't, punishment is coming. Most people, when they become a child of God, at least in my experience, most people, when they become a child of God, if you ask them, why did you obey the gospel? I was lost in sin, and I was going to hell. If you ask a young child of God, why do you serve God? Very common response would have something focused again on if I don't continue faithfully, hell is in my future. Servants serve out of obligation. The only reason they have, the only motivation they have. They're motivated by self-preservation. I don't look past the end of their nose. They can't. There's no reason. There's no motivation. There is no benefit to getting outside of their own person. I get up every day and I do what I do. I got to keep my head down. I don't want to get noticed. If the taskmaster finds me and he notices me in the midst of the crowd, motivated by self-preservation, controlled by fear. If you are the taskmaster, how are you going to get them up and get them working? Well, you smite the scornful so the simple will fear. That's how you do it. A lot of former military in here, right? I assume you all went to basic training. Did you want to be the guy that the drill sergeant found? I preached with a guy for 10 years in Atlanta, Georgia. His name's Eric Owens. He's a Marine. Told me a story one time. He was in the lineup, start of the day. Sergeant was doing something, and he got in the face of somebody down the line from him, and Eric, when the guy did it, started laughing. I don't think you want to laugh in the presence of a Marine drill sergeant the first week of boot camp. I just don't think that's not what, and nobody else in the platoon, nobody else wants you to do it either, because guess what's about to happen? Everybody's paying. Controlled by fear. And you have to do that, because in that kind of relationship, what will they do? They'll rebel. They won't listen. That's all you got. You The threat of punishment is always there. Remember the parable of the talents? 5 talent, 2 talent, 1 talent man. The 1 talent man looked at his master. Y'all remember what he said, doesn't he? Or don't you? I know you. And I know that you are a hard man. He was truly a servant. And the only thing that motivated him was fear of the master. And notice how he then acted. He didn't take any risk. The others took the talent, took the money that they were given, and they put it to use. They invested it. You know what happens when you invest money sometimes? Sometimes you lose it. The one thing the 1 talent man was not going to do is he took it and he hid it. I'm not going to lose it. I don't have any rights in the home. The highest goal of the master, or the servant rather, is to do the job just as the master would, or as the master expects. Jesus even uses that language, does he not? As he's addressing the disciples, he says, when you have done all that is required of you, say that you are just unprofitable servants. We'll come back to that later on if I remember. But I think we read that verse wrong. Have you ever heard a preacher use that verse and say that's what you ought to say, that I'm just an unprofitable servant? Well, exactly. When you have done all that is required of you, guess what? You haven't done anything. God could have created a robot to do all that was required of you. You ever think that maybe He wants more? And you ever thought that maybe the thing that He wants more out of you is not something that is required? You ever thought that maybe you get to choose that? He just see a servant. I mean, you can spot him a mile away when you're dealing with him. A Christian servant, always active. If this is a faithful Christian servant, they're probably here every time the doors are open. Probably involved in everything under the sun. Because if they miss anything, they're scared to death. They never feel like they've done enough. It is the fear of failure. It's the engine of their spiritual life. If you ask them this question, are you saved? Ask somebody this question. You can't do it now because we're talking about it, but ask somebody this question. Are you saved? And the way they answer that question will tell you just about everything you need to know about where they are in their faith. I'm saved if I remain faithful. That is the mentality of a servant. If I do everything the master tells me to do, and that's what they mean by faithful. If I check every box, dot every I, cross every T, whatever other cliche you can come up with, if I do every one of those things just right, if I remain faithful, I'm working it out. I'm trying. The mentality of a servant. Their faith is punctiliar. It's defined by every single action of their life. I remember when I was at the Memphis School of Preaching, all of the deep theology that a first-year preacher student can have, somehow we got into a discussion. It was about the instructor. His name is Garland Elkins. Some of you may know him. But Brother Elkins, if you don't know him, was just one of the most gentlemanly, genteel persons I've ever met in my life. Somehow, some one of us, I don't think it was me, maybe not, asked the hypothetical question to the other students. Garland Elkins got in a car wreck, a fatal car wreck, and as he saw it coming, the last word he uttered some kind of curse, some kind of swear, a sin, would he be saved? All of our deep theological insights, we batted that question around for a whole lot longer than it ought to have been batted around. Faith is punctiliar. You don't actually walk in the light because at any moment you could step out of it immediately. And your whole life is in the light, out of the light, in the light, out of the light, in the light, out of the light, in the light, out of the light. And if you happen to be out of the light at just the wrong time and you die, oops. The faith of a servant. If I'm faithful, if I work hard enough, if I get it all done. The servant, his hope of heaven, is tied directly to his faith in himself. I want to emphasize that point. If this is the image that resonates with you the most, you need to understand something. Your faith is not in God. And I don't mean that in the absolute sense. I mean that in the practical, daily mechanisms of your life sense. Your faith is not in God. Your faith is in your ability to obey. His hope can only be as strong as his faith in his own ability to keep his master's commands. And good people, whether we admit it or not, I know way too many Christians who walk around in their lives and relate to this way of thinking way too much. Now, the second image is one that I don't think if I had asked you the question you probably would have used. But if I'm honest, if I'm open with you, frank with you, in my opinion, this is the metric, this is the paradigm that most of us operate under. It is the paradigm of stewardship. Stewardship in the Greek is a compound word of two Greek words, the word for house and the word for manager. It literally can be translated house manager. In our culture, probably the closest thing that we have is like a trustee in a jail. In a jail or a prison, you've got the regular inmates, and then you'll have a trustee or whatever name they may give it. And what does that individual have? Some added benefits, some added responsibility, some added freedom, some added liberty, and so on. In the Bible, we actually have an example of exactly that kind of person. Sort of happens to him twice. In Potiphar's house, Joseph was a slave. But he was a slave, he was so good at being a slave, so effective in the house of Potiphar, that Potiphar raised him up. And the Bible says about Potiphar that he did not care for anything in his entire house, only except for the food that he ate. Joseph oversaw everything else in the house. The New Testament, we talked about the parable of the talents. We didn't talk about the unjust steward, but the unjust steward is an interesting one. If you remember the parable, of course, the day of accounting comes, the steward's called before the master. He knows that it's coming. He's about to be called before the master, and he knows he hadn't done his job very well. And so he goes around to all the debtors of the master, and he says, "Oh, you owe so much? Well, write it half. Write it lower." Because he's going to get fired either way. He's going to be punished either way. And so he said he's got the idea that then I'll just go out there and I'll make friends. If I forgive the debt of all these other people, when I get kicked out, I'll have somewhere to land. And Jesus actually praises him for that. The people of the world, he says, they're smarter than us. And he's probably right about that. But you see the difference, though? There's never going to be a servant, a slave, given the freedom to misappropriate the funds of the master to such a degree as that unjust steward did. He's still a slave. He's still a servant. But he gets the opportunity to advance. He gets the opportunity to grow. He gets the opportunity of a reward. 5-talent man, you made 10. Or you made 5, you've got 10. Great. What happens to you? you get to enter into the reward. Servant, you served faithfully all the days of your life. What do you get? You don't get whipped. See the difference? They are separated from servants by the promise of payment. That's what separates them. They then are invested in the process of growth. Their lives get better when the master prospers. They get to participate in it. They are accountable then only to the master. Paul says that. It's required of a steward that they be found faithful. He says it's a very small thing with me if I be judged by you or by any other man or even by the courts or even by myself. All that matters for a steward is that he be found faithful. All men are stewards of God and are trusted by Him. What is man that you are mindful of him, Psalm 8 says. And then Psalm 8 says, and you have given him dominion, control over the works of your hands. He's not talking there inside covenant. He's talking about man. Stewards of the world that He provided. Stewards of all the works that He's done. Charged with keeping the garden and tending it. All men are stewards of some level. The difference here then is that they are focused not so much on hell, although they know it's there. You think Joseph knew that Potiphar could punish him? You think Joseph knew when Potiphar's wife began to lie about him what the outcome of that was going to be for him? Of course he did. He knew exactly what was going to happen. He's still a servant. He's still a slave. He's not a son in the house. But he's got at least a sliver of hope. Maybe I can find heaven. You ask them the same question. Why do you serve God? We sing it all the time. No tears in heaven. No sorrow given. No death. No pain. This next one's big, isn't it? I want to see. We've all lost somebody. I want to see them again. Mantra of a steward. The service of the faith of a steward is still based on accounting principles. It's better to take one course of action than it is to take another course of action. There is still a value proposition. There is still a value proposition that is going on in this person's mind. I need to serve God. I serve God so that I can receive something. That's the metric of a steward. The third one, sonship. I'm a child of the King, a child of God. They emulate servants in a lot of ways, or stewards in a lot of ways. Paul even makes the connection that the heir differs nothing than the servant, even though he's master of all. But, he says, they are put under governors and tutors until the time appointed by the Father. Think back to your own children. When you first started raising your child, got to the point where you had to begin disciplining them, why did they serve you? It's real simple. Because you're bigger than they are. That's it. You don't think that's true? Oh, they're so innocent, they're so loving. You're so sweet. They're afraid of you. At least they need to be. If we were to slip off into a parenting discussion, I'd tell you that these days we try to skip this step. Never establish parental authority in the home. Don't want to squash their creativity and so on. But that's why they serve you. Do it inconsistently, and the children will test you. My favorite example here is, I was teaching a Bible study with this lady. She was a single mom, had two twin boys, two years old, which means we spent 4 hours to try and do about 15 minutes of study. Because these two twin 2-year-olds, is any other number? These twin 2-year-olds would always come in and interrupt study. She lived in a mobile home trailer, and this was back in the mid-90s, and that style was just a big long hallway and big, great room, living room, kitchen, all one room. And the only thing that separated the kitchen, dining room, and from the was the line between the carpet and the linoleum. And we were sitting at the table, and it was on the linoleum. Kids were over there on the carpet. And this lady said to her son, "Do not get off the carpet." And I knew he understood what she meant, because he walked to the edge of the carpet, looked right at her. You know what came next, right? Took that next step. And she kind of huffed. I just picked them up and put them. And I was meddled more than I should have, but I said, "Mitzi, you just lied to your son. Get off the carpet, I'm going to spank you." I think is what she said. You just lied to your son. I said, if you don't care whether he's on the carpet or he's not bothering us, if you don't mind him coming over here, don't tell him you're going to spank him. But once you tell him you're going to spank him, you got to spank him. You just lied to them. What was the lesson you just taught the son? At the very least, the lesson you just taught your child, of course, is every time she says don't do it, I got to go and see whether she's serious this time. Serves out of punishment. You don't think that's true, try that kind of an experiment with your child, and they'll test you every time. But at some point, you start bribing them. Get all the little check marks, and you'll get some candy. Get all A's, and we'll go to Disney. Get your room clean, do all this, you'll get an allowance. And you find something that resonates with them, and lo and behold, they start serving not because they're afraid they're going to get punished. They start serving because they want what you're offering. At some point, though, a beautiful thing happens if you have success with your child. All of a sudden, who they are and what they are becomes internal. That teenage boy who you used to have to tell him every single day, brush your teeth, take a shower, use soap. He comes out of his room one morning and he's just done it. And then, of course, the first question you need to ask is, what's her name? But isn't that glorious? They did it themselves. It does work. Hallelujah. They start to become an active participant in the thing, the value, the principle, the task that you are wanting them to see. even before the movie Lion King came out and used this expression. My dad used to say to me every time I used to go out, I'm walking out the door, he would say that. And then he got creative later on, and he would start saying, remember who you are and whose you are. Honor your family and honor your God. Well, that's a fine thing to say to a teenager who's about to go out for the night. That kind of just takes everything off the table, doesn't it? I mean, but you can't say that to a rebellious child. You can't say that to a child who doesn't have any concept of honor, of ownership of his life, of his identity. You can't say that to an infant. Remember who you are. Love is what separates servants and stewards from sons. Think Potiphar loved Joseph? I don't know. Might have. Was love essential to his relationship with Joseph? Nope. That love might have just been utilitarian in nature. Joseph's making me money. I love him. You love your children? The son has a birthright. The father is obligated, morally and legally, a father is obligated to care for the child in ways that do not apply even to the best of servants. Go back to a Roman, Greek, first century culture. If you wanted to starve your slave, you think anybody would say anything to you? Likely not. Try this. Have a child, send them off to school, never feed them. Never feed your child. How long is it going to be before CPS is at your door? You can't refuse to care for your child. Well, he's not very smart. Don't care. He's not very athletic. Don't care. He's ugly. Don't care. Looks just like you. Doesn't matter. He made me mad. Doesn't matter. He's your child. You have to take care of him. But more than likely you want to. Yes, the son does obey. But here's the critical thing. The obedience of a son is not the end of the relationship. It is the beginning. For a servant and a steward, that is the end of the relationship. That's where you start with a son. You start with obedience. But at some point, you and all of your wisdom and all of the experience that you have throughout the course of your life, all of the insight that you have, all the life rules that you know, you want to start sharing those and investing them, infusing them into your offspring. You want to help them see the good things that you did and replicate them. You want them to avoid all the bad things that you did so that you don't get hurt. There is an emotional connection, a need to sustain that relationship with your child. My dad can beat up your dad. The son is proud of his father. They serve freely. Once they buy into this concept, once they internalize their understanding, they serve without thought of reward or punishment. They serve simply because that's what we do. That's who I am. Then long to see God exalted. Reward and punishment, they're still there. But they're fading into the background. The only thing that is in the foreground is God. You ask them if they're saved, they'll say, yes, I am, because God is so good. The statement is now about God. They're proud of their family, proud of their heritage, proud to be a part of all of that goodness. The faith of a son. A son knows that no matter how much he struggles, how often he fails, he's still a son. Even if he denounces his father, turns away, like the prodigal, he can come back. He's still welcome in the house. A good father always loves the son, and of course God is the good father. Slave does not remain in the house forever. At some point, you fail. Any of y'all required to read the book Animal Farm when you were in school? I can't remember the horse's name, but in the book, it's a commentary on basically communism. Pigs rule the farmhouse, and they're trying to build a tower or something. I can't remember exactly. And the horse shoulders all the load because he's big and he's strong. But one day he falls, can't carry the load anymore, and guess what happens to him? The pigs sell him to a glue factory. No matter how good of a servant you are, someday your back fails, your legs give out, you can't produce. And as soon as you can't produce, you're no longer fit for the master. A son remains in God's house forever. Jesus says, if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. Don't forget the first half of that verse. There's a connection here in his mind between sonship and freedom. A slave, no matter who he does or what he does, how well it's done, is never free. He has to perform every single day. And even if he has the most benevolent and beneficent master that could be, it is still true that he will not remain in the house forever. He is destined for failure. There's no escaping it. If you are a servant or a steward, you are destined to fail. Because you have to perform. Your relationship is based upon performance, not love. If you want to be free indeed, you have to be a son. Because yes, you still have to perform. You still have to obey. But your relationship is not based upon it. A son remains in the house forever. Now, can he walk out? Ask the prodigal. If he doesn't walk out, he's free in the house. One is destined for failure, and the other one, so long as he doesn't make that fatal choice, is destined for success. So remember, from the moment we are saved, the truth is we are servants, stewards, and sons. From the moment we become a child of God, all three of those images are true about us. Every single one of them is true. And there are times in our lives where we need that. You may have been a Christian for 35, 40, 50 years, and you have a really, really bad day, and you're thinking about doing something, and it flashes into your mind, I really don't want to go to hell. You ever had one of those? I would love to say that to my boss, but I don't want to get fired. But I'd love to say that to my boss, but I can't because I'm a Christian. Yeah, those things never actually leave you. We're all of them. The study is not trying to tell you to leave those thoughts behind. It's designed to help us see what is actually available to us. How do you perceive yourself? If you think of them in stages of growth, you can always work down the ladder, can't you? If the freedom of sonship is causing you to live a little loose with your life, you can always revert in your thinking back to stewardship or slavery, can't you? And remember yet that God it's both the goodness and the severity of God. You can always move back down the ladder. But if you never move up the ladder, if you can't see beyond, I don't want to go to hell, I'm only saved if I'm faithful in every deed and act of my life. If you can't move over that, when you need the blessings of the freedom and the love and the intimacy of sonship, it's not there for you. God's willing to give it to you, but you don't think you deserve it. And because you don't think you deserve it, it's of no benefit to you whatsoever. It's not about reality. The reality is you're all of those things. It's about when you wake up in the morning, how do you think about your relationship with God? Tomorrow morning, we'll talk about friendship. We'll start looking at some of the life of Abraham. We'll talk about how our faith takes a journey from servant to steward to son and to friend. I do hope you'll choose to come and to be back with us tomorrow morning as we continue this study together. Let me say to you now, if you